and welcome to the Even Stranger Things podcast. I'm Haley Ramm.
And I am Reagan Ramm, and together we form the Synthwave duo Andromeda Coast. And today we are taking to podcasting, and we're going to be breaking down Stranger Things, Chapter 1, the Hellfire Club. And we're going to be looking at, number one, just evaluating the show as a whole.
Yes.
Just as a work of art, as a TV show. But then also we're going to be diving into the spiritual aspects of Stranger Things, as we are Christians, and we think that Stranger Things actually has a lot to say about the spiritual realm. And if you don't believe in the spiritual realm, you can check out our previous episode 0 of our Even Stranger Things podcast, where we broke down our experience with the spiritual world and why we believe that there actually is another kind of parallel reality that goes on and also interacts with our world. Also, that might sound strange, but yeah. This is the Even Stranger Things podcast.
Hence the title. Also, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show, stop right now. And if you aren't going to watch it, then go feel free. We'll spoil it for you. And also want to state that this is not a family-friendly podcast. I'm assuming if you wouldn't let your kids watch Stranger Things, then...
Right, because we'll be including clips from the show.
Not only that, but we'll be talking about some pretty heavy subjects. And answering the question, should Christians even watch Stranger Things? Which might sound like a double standard, considering we've already watched it.
Because you know the answer.
No,
you shouldn't, but we watched it anyway.
We watched it for you.
So you don't have to. No, that's not. Anyway, we'll be answering that question later on. And real quick, if you are interested in synthwave music or just you like electronic music as a whole, then you can actually get a free song of ours by going to andromedacoastmusic.com/fighton, and you can download our latest song for free. All right, so the opening scene of Stranger Things, what do we see? It's a peaceful bird song. If you have the subtitles on, that's how it starts.
And dogs barking in the distance. Mm-hmm. And wheels rattling.
Yeah.
That's got to sound ominous if you don't know what's coming in this scene. All right, so opening scene is we are getting a look at Dr. Brenner, also known as Papa. Elle calls him Papa. And so far, what we have, he's kind of been the villain in times past. And here we're seeing him as this creative person who likes... intelligent person too, who likes to do crossword puzzles and is very meticulous, pays attention to detail, which I guess if you're in this field where you're a scientist, you kind of have to pay attention to details.
Right, and you also see him interacting with the children that he is kind of, molding, training with their
he's
powers.
Training them to,
And of course it's awful. It's basically child abuse. They're manipulating these children, using these children as weapons.
But you do see that he's kind.
Right. You never kind of saw that before. He's actually being kind to the children.
No, and so what I think, what I observed is in times past when we've seen Brenner, it's always been through Elle's perspective. So Elle has always had this negative perspective of Papa. And... We kind of determined that Hawkins Lab is kind of like the church.
It can kind of be a metaphor for the church.
Yeah, it's not 100% perfect.
Right, because obviously in the real world, it's an evil place, and maybe the church will even but yeah, and obviously he's
closing that Pandora's box for today.
Right, this is not how children should be raised. They should be raised with their parents. They should not be experimented on. That's all messed up and wrong. But
the fact that they are children,
if you're taking it as a metaphor,
if you're taking it as a metaphor and you put it in the light of things that are told, the scriptures that are for Christians, we're supposed to come as a child, like with childlike faith, and God is our Father, and so that's kind of how you and the way you end up seeing that.
The way the Christian life is supposed to be is you're supposed to be getting discipled and training to engage with the spiritual war that we're currently engaged in. Right, a lot of Christians don't even realize we're actually at war, that there's a spiritual battle going on.
Or that we're even supposed to participate in it.
Right. And so we're actually meant to participate in the spiritual conflict. And so Hawkins' lab is basically what a church should be, where you are discipled, which is just church speak for you're honing your skills and your powers, right? You're learning how to become a better person and interact with the spiritual battle and help people, that kind of thing, which doesn't really happen in churches today. It's kind of just
not the churches that I've been to.
It's basically just like almost like a concert, or it's just for entertainment purposes. Basically, you just kind of show up, you say hello, maybe at one point in time to a couple people, but otherwise you're just being entertained, whether it's through the music or through the sermon. You're just kind of a passive spectator that's really just kind of being entertained, maybe given a feel-good message, and then you leave and you carry on, and that's about it. There's not really any real spiritual discipleship going on. And
a lot of people say that, that happens in the small group setting.
Right. So
that's where that's where people say that comes in.
But that's kind of, so we can kind of think of that's what the church is supposed to be. It's kind of supposed to be a place for equipping Christians, and that's kind of, if we think about Brenner is kind of like a metaphor for God, and the children at Hawkins' lab and Elle are kind of like the Christians that are to be trained. That might not make sense right away, but as you go about watching more episodes in the series, that metaphor starts to make more sense.
Yes. We didn't come to that conclusion until like episode 6 or 7.
Right.
When
so watching the first episode, you would not get to pick up on that.
No, but the one thing I did pick up on is that Brenner never forces the children. I can't remember his name or what number he was. Was he number 10?
I think so.
He never forces him to do anything. He's always asking, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Let's try. Are you ready to try something else? Mm-hmm. What do you see? Asking questions. And, that's also, really how...
Also, if it becomes too strenuous, he tells them to stop.
Yes.
To let it go.
Yes. Kind of going in the vein that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, which I've gone back and forth on that one. Like, maybe he does give us more than we can handle, so we rely on him, that kind of thing. But I think...
He doesn't tempt us beyond what we can handle.
No. Well, he doesn't tempt us.
Well, I mean, we don't receive temptation beyond what we can handle.
Right. But I think that's a pretty good metaphor for how God, comes to us. He doesn't just force himself on us. He doesn't force us into any of this. It's our choice. We have to take that step to make that choice. And that is another theme that you really see throughout this entire season is everyone has to make a choice. You have to make the choice. There are outside forces that want you to make the right choice or the wrong choice, but ultimately it's your choice. There's a lot of choice,
yeah. And of course, right, again, if you move into just what's actually going on, the children probably don't have an actual choice. So we don't want to, right?
It's not a perfect.
It's a dangerous metaphor.
Yes,
to make.
It's slightly
I was
a dangerous.
Concerned about making this metaphor because it is a very bad thing that's
going
on.
Yes. Well. Okay. Well, you take this, and yet you have churches and organizations that go this far.
Well, those are cults.
Right, but I'm saying that is still accurate. This is this. It's still it can be twisted.
Right.
Basically, anything can be twisted and become dangerous. Especially when you're talking about people's choices.
Right. Yeah, and so, of course, the big kind of whole direction that scene is going is it's showing, right, all the other children that are part of that experiment end up dying.
Dead.
Implied that it's actually Elle that killed them. So it's kind of a big shocker that kind of carries through the first several episodes until you kind of learn more about what went on there.
Right. So all this time we're thinking that, I was thinking, man, I remember saying, man, we knew she said that she'd killed before, but we didn't know it was this, that many bodies.
Those people, yeah.
So the other thing I really like is you see the part where Brenner picks up the child that he was just training. He's obviously...
cares about them.
He cares about them. And that's not what was portrayed in the first 3 seasons. I guess someone could say,
well, he cares about his experiment, so he said that he lost part of his experiment that he invested.
But would you really show that much emotion over losing an experiment? If it was an experiment, you could say, well, I'll just get another test subject.
Yeah, you can't deny that he's definitely portrayed much more
kind.
Sympathetically.
Yeah, sympathetic and compassionate. And obviously the horror he's seeing of all the dead bodies is pretty pretty emotional. Which another thing, that's another facet of God that we often forget, is that God is emotional. He is an emotional person. And he isn't a person.
We also learn later that this is called the Nina Project.
Yeah.
We also don't know that he created this project. It could have, right, this is like a government project. He could have been just the scientist that was put in charge of it. So if he wasn't there, someone else would have been leading it. So we don't know that actually he was the one that authored the program. So
Right. But yeah, I just had to interject that about God and the emotions, because we forget that God expresses emotions other than anger and judgment, and actually.
But we see that kind of, the scene climaxes with him saying to Elle, "What have you done?
What have you done?" Yeah.
It almost has kind of a Garden of Eden feel.
Yeah.
When Adam and Eve first sin, it lets sin into the world as kind of this perfect, environment. If you could say it's all white and pristine, and you have the rainbow, and then you have, of course, it's all marred with the blood and everything in the bodies. And he's like, "What have you done?" So it kind of has a little bit of that kind of a feel to it, and that comes more into play later on in later episodes.
Yeah, we'll dive more deeply into that, because otherwise with this scene it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The rest of our observations, because we kind of came to this conclusion after episode 7, 6 and 7, when you see more of, we're like, hey, this could be that.
So maybe we shouldn't be talking about this early on. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I think it's good, because we're not talking about stuff that's not happening in this scene. We've made observations, and I think it's key to note those things. So yeah. So then we move into the current day. We see the different characters who we kind
of catching up on all the main characters and what they have going on, and it starts off with Elle. Jane is her real name. And so it goes through her writing a letter to Mike and kind of telling him that she has this great life, when actually it's not the case.
She's forcing herself to believe.
Right.
So something that came to my mind was it's her attempt to enjoy a life that was not meant for her.
But kind of backing up before we get into that, just what you see Elle, you see Susie, you see Lucas,
Dustin.
You see Dustin, Jonathan, Mike, all of them, Will, and you kind of see through all their lives, you just see a lot of brokenness, which is understandable based on what they went through in the previous 3 seasons. So you're just seeing that none of them are
happy.
Yeah, and they're all basically lying to themselves too. It's kind of an observation you made. They're just living through a lot of brokenness, which is really sad to see. Them going through. So like you said with Elle, she's trying to kind of fit in and be normal and enjoy life that she's not really meant for. Yeah,
she's denying the fact that she had powers once, and she's just trying to move on. As she tells, in the letter, she's like, you were right, Mike. I needed time or something. I can't remember the exact line that she says. But it's kind of a perfect metaphor for Christians when we deny what we were meant for, when we're just living a mediocre life. I mean, how happy can you be? Especially I think for people who know the truth and just don't know how to get there and who are stuck. I mean, you see, Elle lost her powers because she was bitten by one of those creatures in the previous season, and so that's one way she lost her power.
Do we know exactly how she lost her powers?
Yeah, it was when she was in the cabin fighting the flesh monster. It was trying to get them.
No.
Yeah.
No, the last time we saw her use her powers was when she had the proxy for the mind flare had grabbed onto her leg,
right,
and part of itself broke off inside of her. And so the last time we see her using her powers is actually in the mall, where she pulls it out of her leg.
Right.
And after that, she doesn't have her powers anymore.
Right.
She's not able to use her powers.
But they said it was because it was due to that.
It was due to what?
Due to the bit of flesh monster getting inside of her.
Really? Okay.
I thought that was what I understood.
Okay.
Her powers were taken from something that we see as representing sin, evil spirits, and that kind of thing. And I mean, as Christians, that's how we lose our power, is because of sin.
Right. Well, that's a lot. That's a whole can of worms right there that a lot of Christians don't understand. We didn't really understand either until recently.
No, we didn't. I think we'll have to move that for another podcast because that doesn't. There's there's a whole yeah that fits into something else. So then also you pointed out seeing the damage because we're seeing the relationships and how everybody's, you've got Jonathan and
he's coping
Nancy who are split up, and she's lying to herself about that relationship. Both of them are, and he's coping with drugs.
Right. I mean, it's all so
see everybody.
You also just see the problem with underage relationships that just creates nothing but problems. Because
relationships before you're ready is just not a good, and I don't mean that like just age wise. I also mean emotionally and mentally ready.
Right, but in this case it's definitely age related.
Oh yeah,
especially with Mike and Elle.
Steven.
So with Mike and Elle, right? I mean, they're way too young to be in a relationship, and then they're not in a relationship, but
they're talking about the relationships in that car.
Yeah, and they're having So everyone's just broken and. Has all these different problems you're seeing here in the opening kind of montage with everyone.
And then you have, Dustin trying to get his grade fixed. And so funny because Susie, his girlfriend, is supposed to be this religious person.
Mormon.
She's a Mormon. Well, she's presented as, we know she's Mormon, but is it actually stated that she's Mormon?
Oh, yeah.
Is it stated? Because I can't remember. Well, I mean, Mormonism is considered a religion.
It is a religion.
It is a religion. I mean, like an actual, I don't know, somewhat along the lines of Christianity.
Right.
So anyway, so she's, this supposed to be this God-fearing, righteous person, and then she's going into lie for Dustin, hacking into the school to change the grade. And then she looks at the statue of Jesus and says, "I will repent later." And I just had to laugh because I'm like, how often do we I know I've done that. I'm you
can just repent later, right?
Say sorry. What's that one thing that Tim Ferriss talks about? You can ask for forgiveness later. It's better to ask for forgiveness later than for permission. Or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's.
I know that's an unrelated thing, but that kind of reminds me of that. Ask for forgiveness later. Just do it now, and then you can always ask for forgiveness later. Which
that's not
technically is true, but it's not.
It's not understanding the harm that sin does.
Right, and I mean. I remember
to yourself, not just to other people.
To yourself, yeah, because that's something. I mean, we've come to really understand is just how damaging sin can be. Because we
for a long
had
time
a
as Christians, you're
yeah,
what's so bad about sin? Because you can just
it's covered by the blood, right?
Yeah, and you can be forgiven by God. So
my slate's wiped clean.
But as we've been learning more and more that actually, when you are sinning, you actually are really harming yourself.
It has physical damaging effects, not just
in
physical,
the real world.
But
not just spiritual, but in the real world.
Mental, emotional, psychological, and physical. It all has.
It can actually make you sick.
Yeah, that was something I struggled with that theology for the longest time because I have been a sickly person most of my life, and I'm like, are you kidding me? You're telling me because it's because of sin, but I'm a righteous person. Yeah, I hear myself. I hear how that sounds. But aside from the separation from God, because you and I had just had a conversation several months ago talking about this, and we were like, I don't know about you, but I don't really see how sin is that bad. I know we should see it as really bad. It's really bad.
I mean, on an intellectual level.
On an intellectual level, sin is evil. But if
you logically break it down, you're like, well, God's just going to forgive me for all my sins, and what's the big deal about sinning, right? If you logically look at it down. Yeah.
What shall we say then? Should we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. It's either
because we're learning that sin has real physical, real world consequences for yourself, not just other people, right?
Yeah, it's pretty damaging. So that was the whole. I will repent later.
It's funny because it's so true. It's what.
Yeah, that's why I was laughing so hard. Susie's family, the whole portrayal. Really,
that's a future episode.
That's a future episode, but that was really hilarious. I'm glad they brought more of her in.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see.
So then you have Max too, and you see her brokenness.
If you watched episode 0, then you heard me talk about, I talked
of our
about
podcast.
Yes.
Not Stranger Things.
There is no episode 0 for Stranger Things.
I'm confused.
Yes, obviously I meant of even Stranger Things. If you watched episode or listened to episode 0, I kind of briefly touched on, well, not really briefly, but touched on my experiences and journey through dealing with childhood sexual abuse that was made aware. Kind of was so it's interesting because when you're a child and something like that nature happens, if you're young enough, the brain can't handle it locks it away until you're at a safe place. And then it opens it up.
Comes into Stranger Things with Elle actually later on.
Yes.
Because she has memories that are locked away because they're too bad.
This was so powerful. I was like, some of the stuff that was said, I was like, I was told this exact thing. I know, we can't get ahead of ourselves. So anyway, so with Max, as you see her walking through the hall, she's got the music on, she's just kind of isolated, and she's looking at different people enjoying emotions. And she's depressed, that's obvious, but she's also dissociating, which is she's not really feeling anything, and she can't really connect with her emotions or connect with other people experiencing emotions. And I really the stuff with Max I really resonated with, because that was something I experienced. Like, we would go, I mean, even just at home, I would see, you expressing a happy emotion, you'd be laughing, and I'm like, I don't even feel like laughing. I don't feel like doing anything. I just...
Right, and this is because all those locked away memories started coming up in 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which so all these memories were coming back that you hadn't.
So I was basically, my body, I read a couple of books like The Body Keeps the Score, and it talks about like when this happens, your body is basically taken back to the time when it happened. So your body, it was like, it's weird because like when I would have my PTSD episodes and everything, I would literally feel like I was a child again. I had that same mentality. So yeah, really resonating and understanding what she was feeling. Because I was there. I mean, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Could you relate to Lucas's? I mean, you knew what was going on.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, I know there's something wrong with you.
No, because I knew what was wrong with you.
Yeah, so. He was actually the best. So,
also listening to a really great song by Kate Bush, "Running Up That Hill," which we are going to make a cover of. So stay tuned for that.
It's apparently number 1 in the country right now. Kate Bush. It's the song.
We need to get our cover out right ASAP then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a meme about that. They're like, this is the number 1 song.
Thanks to Stranger Things.
Where Top Gun is the number 1 movie, which I guess was back in 1986. And they're like, and now we're a proxy war with Russia. Like, what are we doing? Reliving 1986 again? Mm-hmm. To an extent, yes, we are. So yeah,
it's a good time to be making synthwave music then, I guess, which is 80s inspired.
Yes. Yeah, so then the one last thing was Lucas trying to fit in. Lucas is fed up with being the freak. And Dustin's like, but that's who we are. I'm fine with that. I'm okay with standing out. He doesn't care. And that I feel is like a really good like battle, like mentally, that happens between Christians. It's like there's some who are okay with standing out and some who just want to fit in. Just don't break the norm. Don't rock the boat. Especially when it comes to, I mean, we saw it in the pandemic. There were a lot of people that were just... Wear the mask. Conforming. As I mentioned Steve Dace. Yeah, he says, thou shalt not confront is not a commandment.
Right. Yeah. So
anyway,
that's also Lucas's way of trying to cope with all the stuff they've been through. He wants status, is what he's seeking there. And of course, you have all the unfortunate LGBT stuff they're pushing, which is just par
between
for the course.
Robin and
Yeah, with her being lesbian.
But then there's
and
the suspected gayness with Will.
Right. Seems like they're trying to indicate that he's gay, unfortunately. So.
Yeah. And I remember when we were watching the first episode, we were rolling our eyes and like, you got to be kidding me. They're going to ruin it. They're going to ruin it and we're going to hate it. Mm-hmm. But then we came back with the attitude like, but that's just a result of sin.
Right.
It's sin.
Again, it's his way of coping. Or you look at why people turn to being gay or lesbian. It's usually a result of some kind of harm that's been done to them, or something sinful and bad that has happened. That usually is why people turn to that, despite what the left wants you to believe. So it's really natural. Sad. It's just really sad.
So yeah, it's not. Yeah, no judgment. Mm-hmm. There's no judgment here. Mm-hmm. We have our own sin. We're not judging anyone, but we are going to call it a sin.
Right.
So.
It's something that's being pushed by...
It is being pushed.
Everything.
But so. I just want to say, we're calling it a sin. I know that's offensive for a lot of people, but we say it in love and not as a, you're such a sinful, disgusting creature, because that's not... Right. It's not where we're coming from. I just wanted to clarify that. We can separate the sin from the person.
Mm-hmm. So then after that, we move into seeing the Hellfire Club, so it's a Dungeons and Dragons organization at the school, and
Dungeons and Dragons. He says that. It's really funny.
So
Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie. So now we don't really know anything about Dungeons and Dragons. I do know. I think that's accurate though. There was a big scare in the 80s and 90s about Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up listening to Adventures in Odyssey. I remember there's an Adventures in Odyssey episode that kind of warns against Dungeons and Dragons because people take it too far and actually becomes a cult and I guess summoning demons and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're participating with that. Yeah, I don't know that I'd heard much about Dungeons and Dragons, but that whole...
Which probably did happen, but people always take things too far.
People have taken things too far.
What we see them doing in Stranger Things doesn't seem like they're doing that.
No, because they understand that it's just a game. It's just a game.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, my family was, I mentioned this in episode 0, they were very anti-fantasy and, even to the point where using your imagination to some extent could get you in trouble.
Right. But you end up seeing later on the whole city of Hawkins is kind of demonizing Dungeons and Dragons versus what's actually going on, which the actual spiritual stuff that's going on in their town. And so I thought that was a good analogy or metaphor for the church, whereas we often focus too much on the external things and think that things are bad or things are sinful when it's really what's going on the inside.
Well, because it's so much easier to put the blame on a thing than yourself. I mean, this has been a thing that's been around for thousands of years. You had the Pharisees who had the same issue. They were like, oh, we're these great people and you're not washing your hands and how dare you.
So, yeah, I mean, the Bible even says in Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against the flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. And so if you really break that down, the word principalities here, if you look at the Greek, is referring to a place of rule, kind of like a government with a hierarchical structure. And so this specifically relates to angels and demons as well. And so we see that the way demons operate is there's a hierarchy. There's higher up demons and lower demons, and we see that in Stranger Things as well.
Not only that, but Jesus mentions, when he's talking to the Pharisees about casting out demons, he talks about a house divided against itself. He's like, why would Satan be working against his own kingdom? Right. And he says the word kingdom.
Right, because they accuse Jesus of getting power from Satan to cast out demons. That just doesn't make sense, because why would Satan be casting out his own demons? It doesn't make sense. That's counterintuitive. So we see that in Stranger Things, as you later learn. I don't know if that's spoiling anything, but
well, in the previous, if you look at the previous seasons, we have seen minor things.
Right, you have like the Demigorgons, which are like the foot soldiers for
the demidogs. And then the vine thingies that trap people.
That they're all servants of the Mind Flayer, who's the overall villain. The overall villain,
yeah, which we still have yet to defeat. Vecna is just. But yeah, I mean, this is an actual. There's a lot of debate whether or not Satan's kingdom has power or is even still working. A lot of people don't even believe in Satan. Or people are afraid of him.
I don't remember who said it, but someone was quoted as saying that the greatest trick that the devil ever played was convincing people that he doesn't exist. And so,
or convincing them to the point where he's scared them into submission to some extent.
Well, that's a different take. That's not what that person said. But
no.
But so that's kind of what we're seeing is the kind of the main value here of Stranger Things is it's making you aware of the spiritual world that's real. And of course, Stranger Things is all made up, but at the same time, it's kind of putting a face on the evil spiritual realm that does exist. Of course, there's also the good spiritual realm, but it's kind of Stranger Things is putting a face to the actual evil spiritual realm and doing so in a pretty accurate way. Yeah,
it was kind of startling because we didn't see it. Of course, this is the first season that we had watched with all of the information that we'd been learning, and just really, really understanding, having the knowledge and the discernment to be aware of these similarities.
So
anyway, we'll discuss the beginning of that later.
We don't want to be getting distracted by things or like Dungeons and Dragons in this case. That's not the true enemy. The true enemy is Satan and his forces of evil and darkness. So we're not fighting against people. Our fight isn't with people or things. It's with the spiritual realm.
Right. And that's another thing that we're seeing, like, I'm going to mention Steve Day's podcast again, because he really talks about like the spirit of the age and how you see all the decisions that are being made today politically. I don't want to really make this political, but there is a demonic force behind it.
Behind a lot of it, yeah.
Behind a lot of it. Because Satan has an agenda. He's trying to take as many people down as he can because he's on a clock. And that was what really stood out to me about the clock. You see the clock. Now, it does represent something else to Vecna.
Their time is ticking away as well.
But, Satan's time is ticking, and he knows it. He knows it.
Because he's already been defeated by Christ. So.
But he still has some...
He's still the ruler of this world.
Yes. He's still a ruler. Yeah, exactly.
And one final observation I had about the Hellfire Club is that we... as traditionalist Christians, we're basically the Hellfire Club today. We're the freaks, as they're like, you hear Eddie and the Hellfire Club, they're always referred to as the freaks because they're weird and they're nerdy and they got tattoos and chains and weird clothing, which basically everyone wears today. Everyone has tattoos and weird clothing and stuff.
Back then, that was
so they're not freaks anymore. But I was thinking like really traditionalist Christians are the freaks today, and
for
the views that we have, and that's why we created this show called Even Stranger Things, because we were talking about a lot of the weird, strange things that we believe. That's really just traditional and been believed by a lot of people for a long time, but is no longer in vogue in our culture today.
Even in Christian culture. So, yeah, we expect backlash, which is okay. It's okay.
If anyone sees this, I don't know if anyone's going to see it.
I still think people are going to watch it, so that's my optimistic opinion.
Hopefully, if not too boring.
I don't think we're boring.
And so then, of course, the first episode climaxes with Vecna's first victim. Of course, you don't know his name yet. We don't even really know his name. But in episode 2, he is called Vecna, based on a Dungeons
you sort of meet him. You sort of get his name by the game that they're playing.
Right. Because that's kind of been the theme for all the
that's
different
always
seasons.
Been the theme.
Is you get the villain from the game they're playing, and so
not only that, but you know how it's going to go down.
Right. So we're paying attention to that. You see,
they try to defeat it on their own.
They had both the basketball game and the Dungeons and Dragons game.
Yeah, editing wise, that was really
being
good.
Kind of parallel, because in the basketball game, their best player shoots and misses. Kind of the same thing in Dungeons and Dragons games. You have Dustin rolling the dice.
Yeah, and he fails. He fails.
And then you have the backup for both games. You have Lucas, the backup in the basketball game, ends up scoring and winning the game.
Both Sinclairs.
Yeah, and you have Erica, the backup for the Dungeons and Dragons game, rolling the correct dice and winning. So I don't know what that means for who ultimately beats Vecna.
Oh, no. I figured that out. It's
probably not going to be Elle.
No, it is going to be Elle.
It is?
Because it was a girl leading.
But
she was the one rolling the dice.
Lucas wasn't a girl.
No,
won the basketball
no,
game.
but when they're playing the game.
They were clearly tying the two things together. It would go basketball scene, Dungeons and Dragons,
I know.
back and forth, back and
True.
forth. And what was similar about both of those was not the gender, but it was the backup was the one that scored, the unlikely person defeated. And Vecna.
I just got an idea.
In all the different seasons, it's been Elle defeating the villain. It seems like that's an indication that someone unlikely is going to win, beat the villain. Probably not Elle.
See, I took it as a girl was going to have to be the one to defeat.
But what was the point of showing the
Vecna.
basketball game at the exact same time
I don't know.
as the Dungeons and Dragons game?
I don't know. I haven't figured
Because
that
it was
out.
flashing back and forth.
I know.
Back and forth,
I
back
know.
And forth. It was very parallel.
Yeah, it was very parallel.
So I don't know. We don't know. Because it's a little speculation because the last 2 episodes aren't out yet.
But that's what I took from it, was that
Okay.
Elle was going to get... Because they're working on her getting her powers back.
But is that really surprising? Because Elle's always beaten the villain in all the different
True.
ones.
But she's never defeat them with the right power, as we've seen, as we later see.
Right. She uses anger.
She uses anger.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Anyway,
So anyway, going back to Vecna's first victim.
Chrissy, the cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
And she is different. She is somewhat different than the rest of the victims, or at least most of the victims, in that she's not really...
Right. Fred and... what's the name of the basketball player?
I cannot remember the basketball. It's like Andy, or we'll have to figure that
Didn't
one out.
do our homework.
For the episode that really zeroes in on him. But it wasn't necessarily something that she did, unless you want to say it's because she didn't stand up to her mother and maybe she feels guilty for just submitting to her mother and everything like that. Because I was trying to think, it's always guilt. Guilt is the accessing
That's what gives
emotion.
Vecna access to people.
Trauma points are a big thing. And she didn't have, the other victims were like car accidents or, Nancy and all of
Max
that.
With
or
her
Max
brother.
with
She
her
felt
brothers.
guilty
There's
for her
other people. But whereas with Chrissy, it was stuff that was being done to her. She was abused. And you see that her mother is the one that's causing the abuse.
Right.
She's...
Then
you don't know if she's physically abusive, but
Right.
she's verbally and emotionally
yeah.
abusive.
Yeah, and you see the father, and you also kind of get the indication that the mother is kind of the ruler of the home. She's the one that's in the front of the painting, which shows the camera
Yes.
kind of pauses on that painting for a second, and she's the one front and center with the rest of her family behind her. And
the father is in the very back.
Right, and you also see when she's going through that trance, which is under Vecna's curse or spell, the father, he has his eyes and his mouth sewn shut, and he's just sitting in the chair. He can't move.
So
you wonder if maybe he would just like get home from work and just kind of
right. That
tune
was
out
my
and not
that
do
was my.
anything,
I mean, it's not completely out of like character for the fathers of that age, because we see all the fathers in this of the.
Well, I don't know if that's accurate to the time period. We didn't live back then. We don't know.
No, but a lot of times that's pretty accurate, where there's abuse going on, and
it's the mother and the father.
The mother and the father, or the father and the mother's not doing anything.
Right.
It's one or the other, and usually, there's some, the father can't help her. Chrissy's helpless is the point, and I think there has to be some symbolic
right. The father
meaning
is supposed to be the protector.
Yes, and his eyes and his mouth are sewn shut, so he can't see.
He's not seeing what's going on, and he's not hearing what's going on, or he's choosing not to.
And he's not speaking up about it. That was the really profound
very
thing.
subtle. Very subtle.
It's very
There's
subtle.
a lot of subtleties in this show, which is really
but the
what we think
details
makes this probably one of the. I think
this is
one
of the best seasons. This is one of the best seasons. It really is. I mean, yeah.
And what's really interesting as Vecna approaches Chrissy is it's very different than any other of the villains. They've almost been like animalistic, just they kill, they attack, that's what they do. Vecna is very more intelligent. Almost, he's actually coming in and he promises to end her suffering.
Yeah.
That's very different.
Yeah. He's like, it's time for your suffering to end. And as we've seen, she's been trying to get a handle on her own suffering by using drugs and everything like that.
She doesn't try to run away from him. She kind of just
She submits. She submits to it.
When you have the boarded up door so she can't get out.
She tried, but ultimately when he approached her, he said, I'm going to end your suffering.
She just let him approach, which we see later. With Max, there was an opportunity to flee, but she chose not to. Same thing with Fred, which again is getting ahead of ourselves into future episodes.
Right, we don't actually know what happened to the basketball player either. We never
Right.
actually see what's going on in his
we
mind.
don't see what's going on.
We know what his tormenting thing is, his tormentor and
Right.
his trauma, but we don't know how it all plays down.
Right.
We just see the external because we had to see that scene to
But
know.
you see, when she does give herself over to Vecna, which is really part of Satan's army, as we later learn, he's like a general in Satan's army. So giving herself over to Satan, thinking it's going to end her suffering. So it's going to be kind of like a metaphor for us when we give into sin, thinking that that's going to end our suffering. We actually just end up more twisted and more broken. And you see, that's what happens in the physical world with Chrissy.
Yeah, that was
Pretty disturbing.
That was very disturbing.
But
And
that
I'm
shows
going to talk.
that's what's going on inside of us when we surrender to
Yeah,
Satan.
it's
or surrender to sin.
horrifying. And at times, like each time you see this, I wasn't going to mention this in this podcast because this one's, I think this is
It's already too long.
already long, but I'll just extend it anyway. Is I so wanted to just, like, I looked away. And then the thought came to mind. I was like, but this is what we look like on the inside. This is an actual reality on the inside. This is what we appear when we're twisted and broken. And, you may say, you shouldn't be putting that before your eyes, and maybe some people shouldn't be watching that, obviously.
So
I'm
I
not
guess that
going to
gets
say.
us into our final point, which is, should Christians watch Stranger Things?
Yeah. And so by the end of the episode, I mean, obviously, when we watched episode 1, we were running on very little sleep. And
Right. And we just given our children to their grandparents to have them for a sleepover. Yeah, I think we only got a couple hours of sleep.
We got
the
3
night
hours of
before
sleep.
Because I don't remember why we didn't get much sleep.
what were we doing?
Were the kids getting that?
Oh, we were reading the book.
Oh, yeah, we were reading a book.
Do we want to mention that in that?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's relevant. So I guess
since we were getting the basis of most of our stuff from.
Well, in the Bible.
In the Bible, right? There's scripture verses listed. A More Excellent Way by Dr. Henry W. Wright. I guess we can link to the book in the
Yeah, actually,
description.
Stranger Things actually proves a lot of stuff in that book, or depicts a lot of stuff in that book.
Yes,
really interesting.
which was why we were like, no way. Oh my gosh. So yeah, at the very, so that's the one thing I
But
forgot.
anyway, so we were really exhausted. And
But-
so then after the first episode, we actually had to go take a nap.
Before we got to the end of the episode, as Vecna was approaching, I paused and I just got like major chills. And I said, Reagan, that is Satan. I said, this is our enemy. This is what we're up against.
And you said you felt like that was God telling you that?
Well, that came
No.
later.
Okay.
That came later.
Okay.
That's for episode 2.
Okay.
Because I thought we were gonna.
But you were questioning after the episode was over if we should even...
Yeah,
keep watching.
because like based on my background, you shouldn't be watching this kind of stuff, and maybe you shouldn't be filling your mind with these images. That's just inviting fear. And I hadn't really prayed about whether or not we should watch it because I was afraid of the answer because I really wanted to watch.
You'll repent later.
Yes, I was kind of like avoiding it because I didn't really want to
Put
acknowledge
Susie
it.
over top of it.
Yes, Susie.
I didn't even have that thought, so...
See, but you've had a much different background than I have because, my parents thought they were,
I watched the X-Files.
I didn't watch the X-Files until we got married. No, my parents thought they were doing the best thing. And because we'd had family members who lived in a fantasy world and were very mentally ill and ended up committing suicide. I mean, this isn't a child-friendly podcast. I'm just going to say it. So because of that, there was the emphasis on no fantasy because my parents saw family members going down that path and it led down a very dark path. So their answer to that was
Well, plus you had
no
a literal
fantasy period.
witch in your family line. And so they would see something like
Yeah.
the show, and it's like, oh, this is dealing with the occult and Dungeons and Dragons and evil stuff
Right.
to avoid that. So
Right. So,
Which is
I
understandable.
mentioned that my family was anti that. And they did that out of love. They thought that was the best thing. And it probably was. Because there's been a lot of stuff in my family, a lot of
So anyway, but that's just why you were
stuff.
thinking
But
maybe
yeah,
you shouldn't
that's
be watching this. And maybe you're in the same place, right? You have the same views, which is totally fine and understandable. Everyone has a different walk with Christ. Everyone has different standards, and that's totally fine. Paul talks about that. What's fine for one person is not for someone else.
But that's again why we're talking
we're
we're doing this podcast.
Right. So we're not saying everyone should watch Stranger Things, but we definitely think it can be eye-opening for a lot of Christians and beneficial for a lot of Christians to watch Stranger Things, especially if you're not really regularly thinking about the spiritual realm, or just not understanding like what we're really up against is not people, right? Like we found it's like actually watching Stranger Things has found us to have more sympathy for people who are in sin, who maybe you aren't the book, which maybe honestly aren't the best people, right? Maybe they're jerks and they're doing a lot of bad things, but it's easier to separate them, the person, from what they're doing by just understanding the spiritual realm that's going on and how they're being probably manipulated and influenced by Satan and by that spiritual realm, the evil spiritual realm.
Yeah, because there's that verse that talks about you are not your sin. Humans were not designed to sin. Originally in the Garden of Eden.
Right,
we were created perfect.
And humans were supposed to go on being perfect forever until Adam and Eve sinned.
Yeah, so we should probably save that for episode 7.
Right, that's a later thing. But anyway,
so many good things. But again, that's one reason why we wanted to, so
we're not going to tell anyone. We're not going to tell anyone to go watch Stranger Things.
No,
we don't think it's wrong if you do watch Stranger Things. You have to kind of make that decision.
Yeah, just pray about it yourself. Yeah, go ask God. See what He says, and if the answer is no, then you just
keep
watch our
podcast,
and we'll break it down for you and spoil it for you. So then I guess we'll just leave off with the cliffhanger that I did pray, and then we'll cover the answer to that. Okay, yeah. So long story short, because we'll share that in episode 2. God did tell us to watch Stranger Things.
He told you specifically.
Yeah, He told me specifically, but then I verified with you because He is the leader.
You asked me,
and I asked unbiased. I didn't tell you whether or not. In fact, you thought I was going to say we shouldn't at first, and you're like, but I don't have any reservation. And He's got this gut instinct that I'm sure is God inspired, because it's never wrong. And
but it seemed weird to think that God wants to watch Stranger Things or any TV show, really.
Yeah.
It seems kind of silly. It doesn't
seems silly.
Not important enough.
We understand how ludicrous and weird and crazy this sounds. Trust us, we know.
Some really crazy things happened.
Even crazier than this.
Much crazier. Things started happening around us in our home as we started to continue to watch Stranger Things, and we'll talk about that in the upcoming episodes. It's pretty insane, pretty crazy.
It is pretty crazy.
You probably won't believe it, but
it's okay.
You'll have to watch and find out in their next episodes what happened.
Decide if you believe it or not.
So if you found this episode interesting and you want more, then feel free to leave a like if you're watching on YouTube and hit subscribe, or if you're listening through a podcast app, feel free to leave a 5-star review so more people can hear this podcast. And just let us know your thoughts in the comments and what your view has been if you've been watching Stranger Things, or of anything that we said during this episode. So
yeah, hit us with the tough questions or the criticisms, because we would love to hear. So I kind of like zoned out on what you were saying. So I don't know if I just repeated what you said.
All right, yeah. So no, it's different. All right, so
I was thinking about the episode and the time.
Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you in a future episode. Right. Bye.
Bye.